Britt found out about the daycare building the same week I did, because I told her about it myself, standing in our kitchen, so excited I could barely get the words out in order. 4 months later, she filed the paperwork to open basically my business 2 neighborhoods over, under a different name, with someone else's money, and she never once told me she was doing it. I'll call her Britt. She was my roommate for 2 years, and my closest friend for 6. And I want to be upfront that I don't think I'm going to make her sound like a monster in this story, because she wasn't one, not really, not even at the end. I think that's actually the part that's been hardest to sit with. The small things, before I understood what they added up to. I want to give you the pattern first, the way I've had to rebuild it for myself since, piece by piece, because none of it looked like anything while it was happening. Around February, Britt started asking really specific questions about my business plan. Not the usual supportive friend questions, more like she was taking notes. She wanted to know the exact square footage I was looking at, the exact price point I'd landed on for a day pass versus a membership, whether I'd found a commercial insurance broker yet, and who. I answered all of it happily. That's what you do when your best friend seems invested in your dream. In March, she started canceling our Sunday coffee thing, which we'd done for 4 straight years, texting something about needing to work on a project without saying what. I asked once. She said it was nothing, just some freelance consulting, and I believed her, because why wouldn't I? Sometime around April, a woman named Dana started coming up in conversation. Britt mentioned her the way you mention someone new in your life. A former coworker, she said. Someone sharp. Someone with money from a family business. I never met Dana. I didn't think that was strange at the time. You don't meet every person your friend mentions. By May, Britt had gone quiet about my progress in a specific way I only recognize now as guilt wearing the costume of politeness. She used to ask constantly, "How's the landlord conversation going? Did you hear back about the loan? What are you naming it?" That spring, she just stopped asking, and I filled the silence myself, assuming she was busy, assuming her own life had gotten full. Never once assuming the silence was because she already knew more about my business than she wanted to keep discussing with me. There's one more from that stretch I keep circling back to. Late May, I came home from a landlord meeting practically vibrating because he'd finally quoted me a real number on the lease, and I found Britt at the kitchen table with her laptop open, and she closed it fast enough that her elbow knocked her coffee mug half over. She said she was just doing some online shopping and felt embarrassed about it, which I remember finding almost endearing at the time, this idea that my roommate of 6 years still got shy about buying herself something nice. I helped her wipe up the coffee. I didn't think about that closed laptop again until months later, lying awake doing the math on exactly what she might have had open. What the Nook actually was, and why it took me 3 years to get it this far. I need to back up and tell you what I was actually building, because the idea itself matters here, not just the betrayal. I've got a 2-year-old, and I freelance in marketing, and for the first year of his life, I tried to take client calls from a coffee shop bathroom more times than I want to admit, because there was nowhere in our city that let you bring a toddler and actually get real work done. Every co-working space had a strict no kids policy. Every daycare required a minimum of 3 full days a week, which doesn't work if your income is unpredictable and your client calls land wherever they land. The idea was simple once I finally saw it clearly, sitting on a bathroom floor at a Starbucks with my son eating crackers off the tile. A hybrid space, real co-working desks, real quiet rooms for calls, and a drop-in childcare room next door, staffed properly, priced by the day or the month, no long-term contract required. I wanted to call it the Nook. I'd wanted to call it that since the day the idea came to me, and I told Britt that name within the first week, back when it was still just an idea, and not yet anything real enough to protect. 3 years of nights and weekends went into turning that idea into an actual plan. I found the building, an old daycare 2 blocks from downtown that had shut down during the pandemic and never reopened, 2,400 square feet, a fenced outdoor play area already built in, exactly the kind of location you don't stumble onto twice. I met with the landlord's agent 4 separate times before he'd even quote me a lease rate seriously. I built a full financial model, a pricing structure, $45 for a drop-in day, $650 a month for a membership, based on actual research into what working parents in this city could realistically afford. I talked to 2 different commercial insurance brokers. I had a folder, an actual physical folder, 3 inches thick, that I'd been adding to for 3 years. There was a stretch in year 2 I don't talk about much. A solid 4 months, where the whole plan nearly died quietly on its own. No betrayal required. The first insurance broker I talked to quoted me a liability number that made the entire model fall apart on paper, and I remember sitting at that same kitchen table doing the math, over and over, trying to find a version where the numbers worked, and not finding one. I almost gave up that winter. Britt was the one who sat with me one of those nights, going line by line through the spreadsheet with me, even though she had no real background in any of it. Just patient enough to keep asking what-if questions, until I found a second broker with a completely different risk model that finally made the numbers work. I brought her a coffee the next morning as a thank you, the good kind, from the place 2 blocks over, and she said she was just glad to help. I believed her completely. I still don't know exactly when that started being untrue. I remember the exact night I told Britt the name. We were still just roommates then, not yet 3 years into the plan, sitting on our old couch with cheap wine, and I said it almost shyly, like admitting a crush. The Nook. She sat up straight and said it out loud twice, testing how it felt in her mouth. And then she said it was perfect, better than perfect. The kind of name that already sounded like a place that existed. She asked if she could help me brainstorm the tagline. We stayed up until 2 in the morning throwing out phrases, half of them terrible, laughing so hard at one particularly bad one, where grown-ups still get nap time, that my stomach hurt the next day from laughing. I think about that night sometimes now, how real her excitement felt, and I still don't fully know how to file it next to what she did 4 years later. I don't think excitement has to be fake for someone to still eventually betray you. I think that might actually be the scariest version of this story, not the fake kind. Britt watched almost all of that happen from 6 feet away. She sat across from me at our kitchen table, more nights than I can count, while I read pricing tiers out loud, asking what she thought. She told me, more than once, that she loved this idea so much, she wished she'd thought of it herself. I remember exactly how that sentence felt to hear. I didn't know yet that she meant it more literally than I understood at the time. A friend named Sasha sent me a message on a Tuesday night in June, no context first, just a screenshot, and then, a few seconds later, a second message asking if I was okay. I was standing in the kitchen when my phone buzzed, rinsing a bottle for my son, and I remember drying my hands on my jeans before I picked it up, because some instinct told me to have both hands free for whatever this was. The screenshot was an Instagram post from an account I didn't recognize, Little Roots Collective, announcing a coworking and drop-in childcare space opening that fall, in a renovated building 2 neighborhoods over from mine. The caption talked about giving working parents a space to finally be both people at once, which is close enough to a line from my own original pitch deck that I actually said it out loud, alone in my kitchen, just to hear how insane it sounded. I scrolled through the account's other posts before I let myself fully panic. Renderings of the space, a co-working room, a separate kids' room with the exact kind of low shelving and soft flooring I'd sketched out myself 18 months earlier. A pricing announcement, coming soon, day passes and monthly memberships. No long-term contract required. 2,400 square feet, the post said, in a renovated building that used to be a daycare. My son wandered into the kitchen at some point during all this and asked if he could have a snack, and I remember answering him in a completely normal voice, handing him crackers, some functioning adult part of my brain still running the household, while the rest of me quietly came apart. I called Sasha, instead of typing anything back. She picked up on the first ring, like she'd been sitting there waiting to see if I would. She said she'd seen the account pop up on her Explore page and almost scrolled past it before the wording stopped her. She said she read the caption twice before she let herself think what she was thinking, because it felt too specific to be real. Then she said the part I still think about most. She said she noticed, in one of the photos, a woman standing near the renderings, wearing a jacket she recognized, and she was almost positive it was Britt. I asked her to send me that specific photo again, the one with the jacket. She did, and I zoomed in until the image went blurry and grainy, and it was her. Same jacket I'd seen her wear 100 times. A green corduroy one she'd bought on sale 2 winters ago, and complained cost more than she meant to spend. I sat down on my kitchen floor with my son eating crackers 3 feet away from me, and just stared at that blurry photo for a long time. I didn't sleep that night. Around 2 in the morning, I did the thing you can actually do now, which is look up business filings yourself, because most states post them publicly if you know where to search. It took me 11 minutes to find it. Little Roots Collective LLC, registered 4 months earlier, 2 members listed. Britt's full legal name was one of them. A woman named Dana Whitfield was the other. 4 months earlier. That's March, the same month Britt started canceling our Sunday coffee thing for a mysterious project she never named. I kept scrolling through the state's filing database after that, not because I needed more proof, but because I couldn't make myself stop. I found the registered agent address, a law office downtown. I found the filing fee, $125, which felt like an absurd thing to fixate on at 2 in the morning. But I remember thinking, distantly, that it had cost her $125 to make this real, less than she'd probably spent on our last group dinner together. I sat on my bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, with my phone in both hands, and I want to be honest that the thing I felt first wasn't even anger yet. It was this strange, hollow embarrassment, replaying every night I'd sat across that kitchen table from her, so happy someone believed in this as much as I did, never once wondering if belief and theft could look exactly the same from the inside. My husband found me still on the bathroom floor around 3, phone dead by then, and I told him everything in this weird flat voice that didn't match what I was actually feeling. He sat down on the tile next to me, still half asleep, and just listened. He asked, once I'd gotten through the filing and the pricing and the renderings, whether I wanted to call a lawyer first thing in the morning. I told him I already knew the answer to that, because I'd looked it up somewhere around 2:30, in that specific manic research spiral you fall into when you can't sleep and need to feel like you're doing something. An idea isn't property. There was no signed agreement, no NDA, nothing on paper that said Britt couldn't build something similar. 3 years of my actual work, the landlord relationship, the pricing research, the insurance calls, none of that legally belonged to me in any way a court would recognize. He asked if I was sure about that, in the gentle way he asks things when he already suspects the answer, but wants to give me room to have gotten it wrong. I told him I was sure, because I'd actually called a lawyer friend from college that same night, texted her at 2 in the morning without caring that it was rude, and she'd confirmed it within 20 minutes, still half asleep herself. Ideas don't get protected. Execution sometimes does, if you've patented something or trademarked a name, and I hadn't done either, because 3 years ago I was building a plan, not yet a company, and nobody tells you exactly when that line moves. Jordan sat with that for a minute. Then he said something I've held on to since, because it reframed the whole next few weeks for me. He said if the law couldn't fix this, that didn't mean nothing could. It just meant whatever happened next was going to have to come from somewhere else. I asked him what he meant. He said he didn't fully know yet either. He just didn't think I should spend the next month waiting for a legal system that was never going to help me, when the actual fight, if there was going to be one, was going to happen between people who knew each other, not in a courtroom. We sat on that bathroom floor until almost 4, my back against the tub, his arm around me, not really talking anymore, just being in the same terrible fact together. He had to be up for work in 3 hours. He didn't once suggest we go back to bed. Sasha came over 2 days later, and somewhere in that conversation she asked me the question I hadn't let myself sit with yet. She asked what I actually wanted to happen. Did I want Little Roots Collective to fail? Did I want Britt to feel as gutted as I felt? Did I want my friendship back, somehow, after this? Did I just want the Nook to still happen, regardless of what happened to her? I told her honestly that I wanted all 4 at once, which probably wasn't possible, and that I hadn't figured out yet which one I wanted badly enough to actually chase if I could only pick one. She didn't push me to answer faster than I was ready to. She just said that whatever I decided, she thought I should decide it on purpose, instead of just reacting my way into something and figuring out afterward what I'd actually been trying to do. I've thought about that advice more than almost anything else from that whole summer. She asked one more thing before she left that night, sitting on my porch steps with her shoes off, the way she always did when a conversation was winding down. She asked if I'd considered that Britt might not even be the person I should be angriest at, that Dana, a woman with real capital who'd apparently never once asked where the idea originally came from, had built an entire investment on someone else's 3 years without a second thought either. I told her I'd considered it. I told her I just didn't know Dana well enough to feel much of anything toward her yet, whereas 6 years with Britt meant I had an entire library of feelings already loaded and ready to go. Sasha said that made sense. She said sometimes the person closest to you ends up absorbing all the anger that probably belongs to more than one person, just because they're the one standing close enough to hit. Here's a detail I haven't said yet that changes how you should picture all of this. Britt and I were still roommates when I found that screenshot. Still splitting rent, still sharing a kitchen, still passing each other in a hallway every single morning while I sat on the biggest secret of my adult life and she sat on hers. The 4 days between the screenshot and our park bench conversation were some of the strangest of my life. I made coffee across from her on a Wednesday morning, handed her a mug the way I'd done 1,000 mornings before, and watched her say thank you without a flicker of anything on her face. And I remember standing at the counter afterward, gripping my own mug so hard my knuckles hurt, thinking, you know exactly what I know, you have to, and neither of us is saying a single word about it. She asked me on that Wednesday, completely normally, how the landlord conversation was going. I told her it was going fine, which was the first real lie I'd ever told her in 6 years of friendship, and I remember the specific taste it left in my mouth. Sour and strange, like biting into something I didn't expect to be rotten. I've thought since about why I didn't just say something right there at the counter. I think some part of me wanted to gather everything first, wanted to have the filing and the pricing and the renderings all lined up before I let her know I knew, because some instinct told me she'd find a way to make it smaller and softer if I came at her with anything less than the whole picture at once. We moved out of that apartment a month after the park bench conversation, both of us, quietly, to separate places, splitting up furniture we'd bought together over 6 years in a series of short, business-like texts that felt like the saddest kind of admin either of us had ever had to do. Here's the part I'm least proud of, and I'm going to tell it plainly instead of dressing it up. I decided, about a week after the screenshot, that I was going to try to open before Little Roots Collective did, even though my own timeline had me realistically 6 to 8 months out. I called the landlord's agent the next morning and told him I was ready to sign, which wasn't fully true. I started looking at short-term loans I hadn't seriously considered before, the kind with worse terms than I'd have accepted if I were thinking clearly. I sat across from a loan officer that Thursday, a woman probably 10 years younger than me, who kept a small dish of peppermints on her desk, and I remember answering her questions about projected revenue faster and more confidently than I actually felt, because some part of me had decided that hesitation would look like weakness instead of what it actually was, which was 3 years of careful planning, suddenly colliding with panic. She quoted me an interest rate that made my stomach drop, and I said I'd think about it, and then I sat in my car in the bank parking lot for 20 minutes afterward, not driving anywhere, just gripping the steering wheel and breathing. I told myself I was protecting 3 years of work. Some of that was true. Some of it, if I'm honest, was just wanting to win a race Britt had started without telling me we were running one. Jordan noticed before I fully admitted it to myself. He asked, gently, one night over dinner, whether I was making decisions based on what the Nook actually needed, or based on what would hurt the most if Little Roots Collective beat me to opening day. I didn't have a clean answer. I told him I honestly wasn't sure anymore, and that scared me more than the original betrayal had, because at least the betrayal wasn't something I'd done to myself. I backed off the rushed loan 2 days later. I kept the earlier signing conversation going with the landlord, but I stopped pretending to myself that speed was the same thing as strategy. I texted her and asked if we could talk in person. She said yes almost immediately, which surprised me, and we met at a park instead of either of our homes, some instinct in both of us apparently agreeing that this conversation shouldn't happen anywhere that used to feel safe. She was already sitting on a bench when I got there, 10 minutes early by my watch, and she looked nervous before I'd said a single word, which told me she'd been braced for this moment for a while, maybe since the day she filed the LLC. She had her hands wrapped around a coffee she wasn't drinking, the same nervous habit I'd watched her do 100 times before job interviews. I sat down next to her, not across from her, which felt strange even as I did it, like some old instinct hadn't caught up yet with what she'd done. I asked her directly how long she'd been planning it. She said honestly, longer than she wanted to admit. Since around January, not long after I'd first told her the pricing model I'd landed on after months of research. She said Dana had money sitting idle after selling a family business, was looking for something to invest in, and she said my idea came up almost by accident one night, when Dana asked if she knew anyone doing anything interesting. I didn't mean for it to become what it became, she said. It started as just describing your plan to Dana because I was proud of you. Then Dana got excited about it in a way that made something ugly light up in me, and I didn't shut it down when I should have. I asked her why she didn't just tell me, offer to partner, ask if I wanted Dana's money myself instead of quietly building a copy behind my back. She said she'd thought about that more than once, and talked herself out of it every time, because some part of her was certain I'd say no, and some other part of her, the part she was least proud of, didn't want to be my employee inside my own idea. She said she wanted something that was fully hers for once, and my idea was sitting right there, already proven out through 3 years of my own research, and she told herself that made it fair game instead of theft. I told her it didn't make it fair game. I told her 3 years of unpaid work is exactly the kind of thing that's supposed to make an idea belong to somebody, even if the law doesn't agree. She started crying, and I want to be honest, that some part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction watching that happen, followed almost immediately by a wave of something closer to nausea at having felt the satisfaction at all. She said she'd been sick about it for months. She said watching me build the loan spreadsheet the week after Sasha's screenshot had made her physically ill, knowing she was the reason I was suddenly panicking, and she hadn't known how to undo any of it without losing Dana's money and admitting to everyone what she'd actually done. Every time I almost told you, she said, I pictured your face, and I couldn't make myself do it, so I kept picking the version where I didn't have to watch that happen. I asked her what she wanted from this conversation. She said she didn't know, that some part of her had hoped I'd yell at her and get it over with, because the quiet, even way I was talking felt somehow worse than yelling would have. I told her I wasn't asking her to shut Little Roots Collective down, because I didn't actually believe she would, and some part of me had stopped wanting to spend my remaining energy trying to force that. I told her what I did want was for her to stop pretending, to everyone we both knew, that this had happened independently of me. I told her I wanted the truth out, not as punishment exactly, just as the only currency I had left, since the law wasn't going to give me anything else. She nodded at that, slowly, like she was agreeing to something, without fully knowing yet what agreeing would cost her. We sat on that bench a while longer, not talking, two women who used to finish each other's sentences, now just sharing a park bench, like strangers, who happened to be crying near each other. Little Roots Collective held a small preview event in August, a few weeks before their official opening, inviting a mix of investors, local parents, and, I found out through Sasha, not through Britt, several people from our old friend group. I almost didn't go. Jordan asked if I wanted to, and I told him honestly that I didn't know, that some part of me wanted to see the space with my own eyes, and some other part of me knew it might wreck me for a week. I decided to go anyway, mostly because Sasha was already planning to, and I didn't want to hear about it secondhand. I stood outside the building for almost 5 full minutes before I made myself walk in, watching other people arrive through the glass front doors, well-dressed, holding little plastic cups of wine from a table just inside. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I'd once imagined exactly this scene for my own opening night, down to the plastic cups. The space looked like mine. I want to say that plainly instead of dancing around it. Not similar, not inspired by, an almost exact execution of drawings I'd made in a notebook 2 years earlier, down to the low shelving in the kids' room, and the specific soft green paint color I'd once described to Britt as the color of actually being able to breathe. I stood in the doorway of the kids' room for a long moment first, and Sasha found me there, put her hand on my back without saying anything, and just stood with me until I could make myself walk back out into the main room. I stood near the back during the short remarks Britt gave, Dana next to her, both of them thanking early supporters, talking about identifying a real gap for working parents, like it was a discovery instead of a theft. Britt saw me about halfway through her remarks. I watched her find my face in the crowd and falter for half a second, losing her place in whatever she'd rehearsed, before recovering and finishing the sentence. I didn't say anything. I'd decided beforehand I wasn't going to make a scene, mostly because I didn't trust myself to do it well in the moment. Sasha did instead. I didn't ask her to, and she told me afterward she hadn't fully planned to either, that it just came out of her, once Britt finished talking and opened the floor for questions. Sasha raised her hand, and in front of maybe 30 people, she asked, evenly, whether the concept had been developed in-house or whether it had built on any existing local research into working parent co-working models. The room went quiet in that specific way. Rooms go quiet when a question isn't really a question. Britt's face did something complicated, and Dana glanced at her, clearly not understanding yet what had actually just been asked. Britt said something vague about market research, and Sasha, still perfectly calm, said she only asked because the concept reminded her so strongly of a friend's business plan that she'd personally watched come together over 3 years, right down to the paint color. Britt didn't answer that directly. She thanked everyone for coming and moved the event along, her voice noticeably tighter for the rest of her remarks. But I watched at least 4 people in that room turn and look at each other, and I watched Dana's expression shift into something I can only describe as a woman doing very fast math about what she might have just invested in. She didn't look at Britt again for the rest of the event, at least not that I saw. She spent most of the remaining half hour on her phone, near the door, and left before the small reception officially ended. The satisfaction and the sickness, together, the first time. Walking out of that building, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel as strongly as I did. Not triumph exactly, but something adjacent to it. A very specific relief at watching the truth exist in a room full of people, instead of just in my own head. And almost immediately underneath that came the other thing. Watching Britt's face crumple slightly as she kept talking through the rest of the event like nothing had happened. 6 years of friendship, and I just stood in a room and watched a friend I used to trust completely get quietly exposed in front of people who mattered to her. And some part of me that still remembered every Sunday coffee we'd ever had didn't feel good about that, even while another part of me felt like something had finally been set right. Little Roots Collective opened on schedule about 3 weeks later. It didn't fail outright, and I want to be honest about that, instead of pretending this ends with her business collapsing into nothing, because that's not what happened. It opened, and it's still open now, but smaller than the pitch deck promised. Dana pulled back a portion of her planned investment after the preview event, enough that Britt had to cut the second phase of build-out, the expanded kids programming she'd been advertising. It's a decent co-working space with childcare attached. It's not, from what I've heard, the thing people talk about the way they talk about a place that actually understands the problem it's solving, because Britt built the shell of my idea without ever having lived the actual problem the way I had. Mutual friends split roughly the way these things always split. A few stopped talking to Britt entirely. A few told me, gently, that they thought I'd handled the preview event in a way that felt more like public humiliation than accountability, even if they understood why I hadn't stopped Sasha from asking what she asked. I didn't argue with them. Some days I agree with them more than I want to admit. One friend from the old group, someone who'd known both of us since before Britt and I ever became roommates, told me over the phone that he thought I'd essentially let Sasha do the thing I was too afraid to do myself, and that felt, to him, like a kind of cowardice dressed up as restraint. I sat with that accusation for a few days before I decided he wasn't entirely wrong, even if I still didn't think he was entirely right either. I hadn't planned Sasha's question. I also hadn't stopped her, and some part of me, watching it happen, had wanted exactly what it delivered. My mother, when I finally told her the whole story over a long phone call, was quieter than I expected. She'd met Britt maybe a dozen times over the years, always liked her, always asked about her at holidays. She said she wasn't surprised business had come between us eventually, because money changes what people think they're allowed to take. But she said she was surprised it was Britt specifically, out of everyone I'd ever brought home. I told her I was surprised too. I don't think surprise ever fully stopped being part of how this whole thing felt, even months in. Britt reached out about 6 weeks after the preview event, a long message, not really an apology so much as an attempt to explain herself one more time, this time in writing instead of crying in a park. She said losing part of Dana's investment had forced her to actually reckon with what she'd done, in a way the private conversation between us hadn't. She said she was in therapy now, for the first time in her life, working through what she called a pattern of taking instead of asking, which she traced back further than just this. Back to things in her own family she'd never told me about in 6 years of friendship. The message ran long, longer than I expected, and one part of it stuck with me more than the rest. She wrote that she used to watch me talk about the Nook at that kitchen table and feel two things at once that she'd never told me about: genuine pride, and something uglier underneath it. A feeling like the world handed some people momentum and just expected everyone else to stand there admiring it. She said she'd spent years quietly telling herself that feeling made her a bad friend, and instead of dealing with it, she'd let it turn into something worse. I believed most of it. I told her I did. I also told her I wasn't ready to be close again, and that I didn't know if I ever fully would be, and she said she understood. And I think, for the first time in this entire story, she actually did. The Nook opened 5 months later than my original plan, in a different building, in a different neighborhood, after I found new investors of my own, instead of leaning on the landlord relationship I'd built before any of this happened. It's smaller than I originally wanted. It's mine, completely, in the boring legal sense and in every other sense too. My son was there for the opening, 3 years old by then, running between the co-working desks in a way I kept gently redirecting him away from, and at some point, he stopped in the middle of the kids' room, looked around at the shelving and the soft flooring, and asked if this was the place Mommy always talked about on the phone. I told him it was. He said it was cool, in the same offhand way 3-year-olds say almost everything is cool, and then he asked if there were snacks, and I realized, watching him wander off toward a bowl of goldfish crackers someone had set out, that I'd built an entire company around a problem he'd never actually have to live through himself, because I'd already solved it for him before he was old enough to know it had ever been a problem. Here's what I actually took from all of it. Ideas aren't protected by law the way effort deserves to be, and that unfairness doesn't go away just because you understand it intellectually. But I also learned that the version of me who wanted to win a race out of spite wasn't actually protecting anything worth protecting. She was just scared. And scared decisions and good decisions can look identical from the inside until you slow down enough to tell them apart. If you've ever had someone take something you built and call it their own, I'd like to know how you found your way through it. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one.